Good morning, Warzone kids. It's a cold day on the trail to the Western Lands this morning. It was like negative 12 at my house, but the sky is clear, the roads are dry, and it's a full moon. There's a big fat moon hanging over the western horizon, and it's lovely this morning. Warzone kids is my term for those of us like myself. I'm a child sex abuse survivor who grew up in an environment where it was more like a low-grade guerrilla war against your psyche, your soul, than it was like a supportive nursery. And I think of our psyche, our soul, as like a Jenga tower. At the beginning of the game, it's a solid block of wood made up of smaller blocks. And with every turn, you take off a block and you put it on top. Well, every bit of harm, abuse, and neglect in childhood takes pieces out of that Jenga tower and puts them up on top. And then for us Warzone kids, by the time we reach adulthood, that Jenga tower can be like a tall, swaying tower just about to fall over. Can't even look at it hard, it'll come crashing down. Many of us have Jenga towers that have come crashing down, sometimes numerous times. I know I have. Well, when your Jenga tower falls over, just grab a piece close to you and put it back. And that's the task of our life, as I see it, as Warzone kids, to live our life right now in the present. Not being like an old woodcutter dragging the log of your past around with you, trying to whittle it into shape, trying to whittle the log of your past into a perfect key to unlock happiness in your present. And not going through life like a young hunter, looking off into the future, keeping your eye as far ahead of yourself as you can, looking for what's just around the next bend. Maybe you'll see that deer around the next bend. Maybe you'll see a moose. Whether you're an old woodcutter living in the past or young hunter looking away into the future, in either case, what you're not doing is looking at the ground right under your feet, the ground of the present day, which is the only day you ever have, today. And we can get in today's miles on the trail. So this morning, I was thinking about the Fiery Wigwam. I got this book proposal I'm selling called A Pilgrim's Progress, and I imagine the inward journey that we all go on and that we as Warzone kids are on. I imagine it as a journey toward the trail to the Western Lands, a place of peace and wholeness where we learn and become what we are right now. And in this book, I imagine it's letters written back and forth between a couple of pilgrims on the trail. And they write each other about the obstacles they face. And these obstacles they face, these hurdles, these trials, mirror the trials on the inward journey. They've gone through the Grail Forest where they get lost and you got to make your own path out. They've gone through the Turpentine Toddler Bog where sticky toddlers made out of sticky asphalt and tar and turpentine get caught up. You get caught up in them. And those are thoughts that we have about the world. Sorry about that, got a itchy eyeball. Those are thoughts that we have about the world and ways of thinking that we can get stuck in because they're very sticky. And they go through the Canyon of the Furies and Magar's Stronghold. And they got to deal with Sappho's Stones. And if you're interested in any of those things, I got videos about them. You can go to my channel on YouTube at Trail to the Western Lands. I got them named and in a playlist. Well, the next place they come to is the Fiery Wigwam. And that's related to my experience in healing circles, specifically with Hidden Water. Hidden Water is an organization that facilitates healing circles by and for those affected by child sex abuse survivors. They have circles for actual sex abuse survivors like I am. They have circles for non-offending parents, non-offending family members. They got circles for partners of loved ones. And they have circles for people who've caused harm to children and are ready to make amends and take responsibility. My apologies again. And I had an interview last week with Elizabeth Clements, the founder of Hidden Water Circle. And if you're at all interested, I hope you go watch it. It's a conversation with her about healing circles, how they got going, and just kind of how they work. And if you're affected by child sex abuse, whether you're a partner or a family member or a child sex abuse survivor yourself, or if you've caused harm to children and you're ready to make amends and take responsibility, check out that interview. Check out that conversation. But my obstacle on the Trail to the Western Lands, this trial that the pilgrims face, I call it the Fiery Wigwam. And that's just how I imagine my time at Hidden Water Circle. Because I do not come from a time and place. I'm a 51-year-old Gen Xer raised in Oklahoma, and I was raised in the heart of the middle of the buckle on the Bible Belt. And I was raised there by true believers, devout folks, a whole community of really devout, sincere folks that live their life by a code. They wanted to be one with God. They wanted to find salvation. And they were serious about it. And among the things that was not part of their world was therapy, self-help. They got all the self-help that they wanted at church. I don't necessarily mean they got all they needed, but that's where they looked to it. And they just did not look to psychotherapy or what we would call psychological healing. That just wasn't part of the world. Was not part of the world in the 70s and 80s where I'm from. My rung on the socioeconomic ladder, working class. Therapy was not part of the equation, let alone something like healing circles. So I had a creative coach that I was working with, and she could tell I was kind of a hot mess as a person. I was writing a lot, but she could tell I was kind of a hot mess as a person, I think. And one day she said to me, "Ben, have you ever thought of pursuing healing?" And the answer was no, I never had. And she was aware of Hidden Water Circle from someone that she'd known, and she recommended me to it. And I went and I got on the waiting list. I signed up probably in January or February, and the circle I was going to do wasn't going to start till September. And it felt like an eternity. And that might be your experience too. Go ahead and sign up. hiddenwatercircle.org, I think. I'll put a link in the description. If you have any curiosity about it, go ahead and sign up. Get on the waiting list. Time will pass and you'll get there. And I was nervous about it, but I was desperate. I was desperate to feel better than I was. And I was desperate enough to do something like sign up for a healing circle. And I looked on the website and it talked about restorative justice, and that made me very suspicious because I felt like I was going to come along with a political agenda. And don't waste your time trying to guess about my political views. They're eclectic and strange. Pericles in 5th century Athens is the last elected official I really fully support. It's all been downhill since then. I live in Vermont now, and I grew up in Oklahoma, and I'm kind of equally at home and alienated from both places in terms of their political orientation. But that made me suspicious. Restorative justice. I learned better. I learned that what they're getting at is the idea that the quest for justice and vengeance, which me and a lot of my fellow child sex abuse survivors are very familiar with, anger and rage. There's no future in that. When you start off on a vengeance quest, first thing you do is you dig 2 graves. That's true. Restorative justice is the only kind of justice you're going to find, and I learned that what that meant was restoring me to myself, restoring me to a place of peace and wholeness so I could learn and become what I am. That's restorative justice. And I went to that healing circle, and that's how I imagine for me and my pilgrims. I imagine my pilgrim walking along through the thick willow bog, the thick willowy thickets, can hardly see 1 foot in front of you to take the next step. And my pilgrim meets some witches. And that's a term that I use with the highest respect, the witches. These were people who knew about psychological transformation. They knew about magic. They knew about alchemy. Now, they didn't say magic and they didn't say alchemy. Those are my words. They didn't say they were witches. And if any of my fellow circle keepers or anyone from Midwater is watching this, I hope you know how I mean it. Magic. And I asked them, how's this supposed to work, this healing circle? And they told me the process. We do a welcome call before the circle starts. I'm a volunteer circle keeper, and I'm going to do my welcome calls for the next circle here in the next few weeks. They walked me through the circle and how it worked. And I said, well, where's the healing happen? Where does the healing happen? I don't get this. We all get together, and we got a talking stick, for the love of God. Good Lord. Has it come to this? But I was desperate, and I was suffering, and I wanted not to suffer as much as I was anymore. I was willing to try anything. So I went into the wigwam with those witches, the wigwam of that healing circle, and I showed up. And we spent 3 weeks talking about how to feel safe and what we needed and all that. All this stuff was real hard for me to tolerate. I got real angry. Every week I'd get out of the meeting. The first 3 weeks I'd get out of the meeting and I'd write angry emails. And I never sent any of them. I have more sense than that, and luckily for me. But I wrote them. Wasting my time. But I went in the wigwam, and I stayed in the wigwam of those witches, Pilgrim. And after a while, things were different. After a while, things were different. That's how alchemy works. There ain't no real alchemy. Alchemy is the thing that they used to do in the medieval period in the ancient world, where they tried to find ways to turn lead into gold. That's one example of alchemy. They tried to find ways to turn lead into gold. If you look into alchemy, that's what you're going to read about. They looked at lead and they thought, well, they looked at lead and they looked at gold, and they said, well, they look pretty similar. They're both soft. They're both real heavy. They're both metals. They got about the same kind of consistency. You can cut them both with a knife. Seems like there'd be something we could do to turn this lead into gold. Well, there ain't. But there is a way that you can turn the lead of your suffering and the war zone in your head into the gold of peace and wholeness and learning to become who you are. And it is magic. But I don't say that healing circles are guaranteed to produce it or that they're for everyone. I just know that it's possible, somehow or another. And for me, the alchemy happened in that fiery wigwam. By the time the circle was over and I was ready to walk out of that wigwam, I was a different person. And I'd had experiences that I'd never had before. I was an addict. I mean, to put it in 12-step terms, I would say, I have an addict's personality. I'm very prone to want to put stuff into my body and do things in my body to change how I feel. That's the heart of addiction. The obsession to do something to change how I feel and the compulsion to keep on doing it. Many of my fellow war zone kids can relate. I was a burner and a bulimic, a binge eater. I've definitely worked a lot, filled my mind up with work so I didn't have to think. Filled my mind up with reading books so I didn't have to think. And in all the drugs I've taken, I never had any experiences as profound and long-lasting and mind-altering as the experience of sitting in that wigwam with my fellow child sex abuse survivors and feeling a connection with them, feeling that for the first time in my life, I was at a time and a place where anything that came out of my mouth, anytime I spoke about my own experience, including the things that are in my mind, and if you're a war zone kid, if you're a child sex abuser, the things that are in your mind that you think no one could relate to, no one else could understand, those things. Everything that I brought out of my mind, the other people in that wigwam with me, and by wigwam, really what I'm talking about are boxes on a Zoom screen. That was our wigwam. Everything I brought out of my heart and my soul, the people around me could relate to, my fellow child sex abuse survivors could relate to. And I'd never had anything like that in my life before. Never. Everything any one of them said, when they shared with me their experience, the things that they never thought they could say to anyone, the things that they thought made them completely alone in the world, everything any of them ever shared with me, I could relate to. And I could see some of myself in each one of them, and I could feel it. I could feel their pain and their suffering. And I know that every time I shared, I could see on their faces that they could feel my pain and suffering. And they knew what I was talking about. And I felt like I was with them, and I felt like they were with me. And that was magic for this pilgrim. That was pure alchemy. That was pure lead into gold. And all it was a moment, a series of moments over 12 weeks of sitting in the wigwam with my fellow human creatures and listening to them share to be understood, and listening to them so that I could understand them, and myself sharing to be understood and listening to understand. That's all that happened. That's all it was. Where's the magic? Huh? When does the lead turn into gold, and what made it happen? Well, I don't know. We took some lead, and later it was gold. That's all I can say. The lead became gold. And my suffering and pain, and sharing my suffering and pain, became freedom and peace. There's nothing like it, Pilgrim. And I don't know how exactly it works or why exactly it works. And I doubt that it would have worked for me. It's not like, I don't think that I could have beamed myself into that wigwam 10 years ago. I think the first circle I did was something more like 3 years ago. I don't think I could have beamed myself into it 10 years and got the same gold out of it. I don't think anyone could have made me go and I'd have got the same thing out of it. I think part of the way the magic works is that you have to walk into the wigwam. You have to walk in there of your own free will. When I was a kid, I loved reading Narnia books. And in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, these little kids go in a wardrobe. It's just a cabinet with clothes in it. They open the door and they go in, and a whole new world unfolds in front of them. And no matter how much time they spend in the magic world of Narnia, when they go back to the regular world, no time has passed. But somehow they're still changed. Felt like that. That's as good a image as I can think of from my experience in Hidden Water Circle. So that's the wigwam that my pilgrims go into. Now, why it's a fiery wigwam, we'll talk about that next. But for right now, pilgrims, it's a beautiful day on the trail. We can get a lot of miles together. Daylight's burning. Let's get started.